On Friday, we had the mini budget. That's the first budget under the new Prime Minister. And there's one thing that's absolutely certain. They are taking this country into way more debt. However, the question is, how is all of this going to impact the property market? Hey, if you're watching my videos for the first time, my name is Saj Hussain, and on this channel I share with you my 15 plus years of property investing experience to ultimately help you get further faster in your own property investing business. The new Chancellor in his statement made it absolutely clear what he wants to do is stimulate growth in the country, but stimulate sustainable growth rather than these constant peaks and troughs that happen within the economy. Much of what he talked about in the budget was primarily around cutting taxes, and for property, the big one was really the reduction of stamp duty. As opposed to what normally happens with stamp duty, which a new leader comes in, they start tinkering with stamp duty, they might increase it slightly or decrease it slightly for a period of time, and that stimulates growth. What they've done this time is made permanent changes to the system as opposed to temporary ones, which what that does causes a drive in the property market. So for example, the last time a stamp duty was cut for a period of time, what happens is people are rushing to try and buy property before the deadline finishes. Now that the stamp duties change, there's no deadline as such. Previously, if you were purchasing property up to £125,000, there was no stamp duty. So they've now doubled that to £250,000. So there's no stamp duty for property purchases up to that point. And if you're a first-time buyer, there's a further relief taking that discount up to £425,000. That's quite a big discount. That means if you're purchasing a property as a first-time buyer up to £425,000, there is no stamp duty to pay. Now, people that in the south are probably going to benefit from that, but generally a lot of stamp duty reductions tend to benefit those further up north where properties are cheaper and they're lower prices. However, as a property investor, developer, landlord, people that fall into our space, we still have to pay the extra 3%. So yes, there'll be a bit of saving in terms of the overall stamp duty rates are reduced, but we'll still have to pay the additional 3% that we have to pay when you're purchasing a second, additional or investment property. Lower stamp duty rates can be really helpful to stimulate the property market at the lower end. So people that are buying, for example, their first home, when they're purchasing that property, they've got deposit that they need to put down and the rest of it they'll probably have as a mortgage. But then also the stamp duty, that's additional money that they need to find to pay for because it's not something they can add on to the debt or that's something they can add on to the mortgage. So it's additional cash they need. So once that stamp duty is reduced, or in this case eliminated for maybe many first-time buyers, it means they don't need that extra chunk of cash. So what often will be the case is more first-time buyers will be thinking about buying property because it'll become more cheaper and more affordable for them, slightly. So we would assume this is going to create a demand for the entry-level properties. That means more people are getting onto the property ladder. So people that already own their first home, for example, they might be moving up to say a larger property, and it creates this upward effect in the property market where all the prices start to rise. That's what you'd expect to happen. However, the other main thing we need to take into consideration is that on Thursday, just a few days earlier, the Bank of England increased their interest rates by another 0.5%. So taking now the new base rate to 2.25%. This is the highest it's been since 2008 before we had the last major recession. And ultimately what that means to most people that have a mortgage is their mortgage rates now start to rise. And particularly if you're purchasing your first property and you're taking on that mortgage, your mortgage rates are going to be higher than what they were, say, a year ago. So yes, although stamp duty has been reduced, it'll be cheaper to get onto the property ladder. Actually, their cost, their affordability, they'll now be under more pressure because those costs will be higher in terms of the monthly mortgage payments for that property. Now, the main competitors for first-time buyers are people like me, i.e. landlords. People are buying property to be able to bring onto the market in terms of rental stock that people are then going to use as rented accommodation because they're buying entry-level property, which is the same property first-time buyers are buying first homes. Often they tend to be the ones that work financially the best when it comes to buy-to-let stock. Now what happens in this situation, the buy-to-let investor, they need to put down a bigger deposit when they're taking on a purchase with a mortgage, and often that's about 25% as opposed to maybe 5 or 10% that the first-time buyer might be putting down. Then the stamp duty, we still have to pay an additional 3% over and above what the normal stamp duty rate is. So the buy-to-let investor will be paying that additional stamp duty, whereas a first-time buyer is probably not going to be paying any stamp duty whatsoever. So it's not really a level playing field when the first-time buyer is competing against with a buy-to-let investor in terms of purchasing that property. The first-time buyer is in a much better position in terms of what they'll pay overall and be spending for that purchase. Then of course it's also important to mention that the interest rates that the first-time buyer will be paying, often they're lower as well compared to what buy-to-let mortgage rates will be. And if you want to learn more about how buy-to-let mortgages work, I'll link up a video up here for you which you can come back to and watch afterwards. Some of the other changes that have been announced in the budget really have been around taxation in terms of reducing tax. So that's corporation tax, income tax. Next year, both these will be in line at 19%. So the hike that was going to happen in corporation tax is not going to happen. Income tax rates will come down to 19%. They'll both be in line. Also, the 45% tax rate will be abolished. It'll be 40% will be the higher rate. Now, it sounds like there's a lot of reduction happening in taxation. Taxation is what the government needs to be able to have the money they need to be able to run the country. So how are they covering all these? One article I read recently was that this is the biggest set of tax reductions since 1972. They are absolutely massive. Now, the only way these are going to happen is by the government effectively borrowing more money, i.e. getting the country into way more debt than it is already in already. Now, the markets haven't really responded very favorably to this. In fact, the pound just absolutely plummeted in value as soon as the announcements happened. My belief is that these early indications of these changes show us that this government is much more serious about creating growth in the economy, supporting entrepreneurship as well. There have been some murmurings that there might be some changes to Section 24, which I think could be a really good move. However, they haven't really filtered through in this budget right now, but I think there's still a good chance that some of these changes might happen in the coming months and probably before April 23. Two other things that were mentioned in the budget that I think are quite important that could impact us as property investors. The firstly is the new investment zones. These are pockets in the country, in fact 40 of these, that the government wants to select where it will be cheaper to be able to invest and set up and run businesses from. So for example, there'll be no stamp duty to purchase property in those areas. There'll be no business rates if you're running businesses from there. There'll be a reduction in taxation as well. And this will run for 10 years. This is to stimulate certain areas. And I suspect this will probably in the more deprived parts of the towns and cities that we live in. But also what that means is there'll be really good opportunities there to be able to take properties and develop properties in those areas, particularly around building new homes as well. And that leads me on to the final point. I wanted to make this video short and sharp and just focus on the key things that will impact us as property investors. And that's the government's decision to be releasing more land to encourage property development. Now, I think this is a really good sign. Now, they probably already have a limited amount of land that they can release, but that'll be enough to start stimulating some growth in the property market, because the biggest challenge in the market is the lack of supply, the lack of existing property coming up for sale and new property that's been brought to the market. So if they start releasing land, making it easier, and there's already again murmurings around maybe changing the planning system that needs some adjustment doing to it, I think these things are really a good sign for us that will potentially stimulate the market and overall be a good thing for the property sector. Overall, I think the budget has been positive. It's a step in the right direction. There's so much more that they could have done and we were hopeful they would have, but quietly, I'm still confident they will make some changes that are good for the property market and overall good for the economy as well. We'll probably see those in the coming months, and I said, and probably before April 2023, we'll see the government making some bigger changes within this space. Now, if you've been enjoying this content, the first thing to do is click on my face over here to subscribe to the channel. The YouTube algorithm tells me that many people that watch these videos are not subscribed to the channel. And that's absolutely crazy, right? So if you click on my face, you'll subscribe to the channel and it'll help get this content out to way more people. And then once you've done that, click on this video over here, which is a video around how the planning system impacts the property market. So go ahead, click on this now, and I look forward to seeing you on this video.